So there are some questions. I'll try to answer those first. So the first one is about karma. If the most important thing in terms of generating karma is motivation, karma, will, volition, but at the same time, it is said that in every millisecond we are creating karma even when we sleep. How can we generate karma if at that moment there is no will as we understand it? There are a number of mental factors. It's good to study the mind and mental factors. Lorig, it's called in Tibetan. And that subject explains all the different aspects of the mind and all the different mental factors that come and go in our mind. So there's one mental factor that is said to be ever present. It's present in every moment. I mean, there's actually five mental factors that are ever present. And one of those is, well, sometimes we call it intention. That's one translation, intention. Another translation is volition. I don't know. That seems to be what he's talking about here. So this mental factor, intention or volition, is present every single moment with every single state of mind that we have. Even, when we have our five senses, seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, touching, there's that mental factor that's always present. And also with mental consciousness, thinking, and also when we're asleep and our five senses aren't operating, our mental consciousness is operating. So that mental factor is still there every moment. And the way it works, or the function of this mental factor, it's what draws the mind to an object. So that's its function. It connects the mind to an object, whatever the object may be. When we're awake, with our eyes open, then we're looking at things, we're hearing things. So it's that mental factor, intention, that causes the mind to look at an object or hear a sound or whatever. And then even when we're asleep, that mental factor is still there. And when we're asleep, we may have dreams. So there are dream objects, people and things and events that our mind is creating. And so the mental factor of intention is still there and taking the mind to those objects. So that mental factor is said to be very, very important because that's actually what karma is. Karma is that mental factor of intention. By itself, it's neutral. It's not virtuous or non-virtuous. It's not good or bad. But if there are other mental factors present, for example, if there's a non-virtuous or negative state of mind, like anger or attachment, desire, so if one of those mental factors is present, then the intention will also become non-virtuous. For example, if we see somebody we don't like, and even just looking at that person, we may have negative thoughts about them. We may also speak negative words towards them. We might even do something physically aggressive towards them. So it's the mental factor of intention that kind of pushes the mind towards that object. And it's very complicated, and I don't fully understand it myself, all these different factors, all these different ways that the mind works. But the point I'm trying to make here is that intention happens automatically. It's an automatic thing. It's not that we deliberately choose to look at an object or focus on something. It just happens. It's just something that happens automatically. And yes, it's true that each moment, because intention is always present, then each moment we are creating karma. Karma is being created. And whether it's virtuous karma or non-virtuous karma or neutral karma depends on whether or not there are other mental factors present, non-virtuous or virtuous or neither. And then when we're asleep, even when we're asleep, this mental factor is still there. It's still operating. Okay, so we don't have to be conscious, awake, in order for that mental factor to be operating and karma to be created. So even when we're asleep, that mental factor is there, operating and creating karma. So we do create karma when we're dreaming. So even in our dreams, we sometimes may get angry and act aggressively, or we may have very positive thoughts and feelings and do things that are positive. So we create karma in our dreams, but it's not the same as the karma we create when we are awake. Because for one thing, like if we kill somebody in a dream, we imagine killing somebody, there isn't really somebody who's killed. There's no real victim. It's only an imaginary person that we are killing, and no sentient being has actually been killed. So it's not like a complete karma, but still it's negative, and there's some negative karma created by the things that we do in our dream. And in the section on karma in the Lam Rim, the kind of karma that we create in dreams is said to be, it's in a category that's called indefinite karma, meaning it's not sure what kind of result will come of that karma. It's not definite that there will be a result and what kind of result it will be. So yeah, it's not as serious as the karma we create during the day when we're awake. But since we do create karma in our dreams, it's recommended that before going to sleep, that we try to have a positive state of mind, a virtuous state of mind that will affect our mind while we're asleep and dreaming. So there's different practices we can do. We can go to sleep thinking of the Buddha. You can imagine your head is in the Buddha's lap when you're going to sleep, and you're feeling devotion to the Buddha, or Tara, could be any of the Buddha figures. So feeling their presence there while you're sleeping can help your mind to remain positive, even during your sleep. And going to sleep with thoughts of loving kindness, bodhicitta, and reciting mantras. So those are good things to do when going to sleep. Definitely try to avoid going to sleep feeling angry, because that might cause your mind to be angry the whole night and having angry dreams and maybe doing violent things in your dreams. So it is important to try to go to sleep with a positive state of mind, not a negative state of mind. Okay, so there is a difference between this mental factor of intention and motivation. When we talk about motivation, I haven't really come across an actual explanation of what motivation is, other than we are encouraged to try to have a positive motivation for the things that we do. So that's why at the beginning, before a teaching, before a Dharma talk, or before a meditation, we are advised to bring into our mind positive thoughts, altruism, wanting to become a Buddha, to help all living beings, and so on, just to make sure that the motivation we have for what we do is something positive and virtuous. So that's more like something we do deliberately and consciously, generating a motivation. Whereas intention seems to be more automatic and maybe not always at the conscious level. Yeah, often it's just unconscious. Our mind is just drawn to an object. So it's good to, if you can, read, study, follow the course on Lorig to learn more about the mind and the mental factors. Okay, the next question is, when you talk about anger destroying positive karma, is it because our anger has had a harmful consequence, or does any kind of anger burn merit? Um, well, mm, one place where this topic comes up is in Chandrakirti's text. It's a commentary to Nagarjuna's fundamental wisdom. It's called the Madhyamika supplement to the Middle Way. And in there, in one section, he talks about, he's mainly talking about anger at bodhisattvas. So he says, if you're a bodhisattva and then you get angry at another bodhisattva, it's really, really negative. And that anger can set you back a lot in your practice. You know, it's almost like you go backwards, you destroy a lot of merit and so on. So, but it's also said that anger at anybody is destructive. Um, Anger is always destructive. And my understanding is that it doesn't have to be anger that you act out and actually do something harmful. I could be wrong about this, but I mean, this is how I think that even having angry thoughts in our mind, even if you don't act them out and speak words or do something physical, just the angry thoughts in your mind can have a destructive effect on your virtue, your good karma. So I think it's best to try to not get angry. Of course, that's difficult to do. Even the Dalai Lama says that he still gets angry sometimes. So, you know, we have to be at a very high level of our spiritual development before we are free of anger altogether. But in the meantime, while we still do have anger in our mind, we should try our best to not let ourselves act it out, and also not let it proliferate in our mind, not let ourselves get caught up in the tsunami wave of anger, and instead apply antidotes, work on antidotes. There are lots of wonderful methods that can be used to deal with anger. Shantideva's Guide to the Bodhisattva's Way of Life has a whole chapter 6 of that text is all about how to have more patience and how to have less anger. So he gives many, many, many methods for dealing with anger. And I know there are books, I'm sure there's some in Spanish, books about how to work with anger that explain these different methods. So we should really try to do that, to work on our anger and try not to act it out. So even if you know it's there in your mind, but try to prevent yourself from speaking or acting in an angry way. Find methods to deal with it. Then it's the same question as before. Okay, then there's a question about mantras. When we recite mantras, but not within a sadhana, should any visualization also be done? Well, it's good if you if you visualize while you're reciting mantras. There's usually some visualization, but that depends on the particular mantra, the particular practice. For example, probably the most popular mantra is Om Mani Padme Hum, the mantra of Chenrezig, the Buddha of compassion. So while reciting that mantra, it's good to visualize Chenrezig. If you receive the initiation and you're qualified to visualize yourself as Chenrezig, you can do that. And while reciting the mantra, you can imagine sending light out from your heart to all living beings and purifying their suffering and causes of suffering and help them progress along the path. Or if you haven't had the initiation, then you can visualize Chenrezig in front of you or above your head, and light flowing from Chenrezig filling you. You can also imagine Chenrezig above the head of other people, other beings, and light and nectar flowing and purifying them. And this is a very good thing to do when somebody is sick. One of the Western monks that I know, he's been a monk for a long time. And recently there was the news that he's got COVID and he's in the hospital in Nepal. And so Lama Zopa Rinpoche sent the message uh, requesting that we imagine Chenrezig Avalokiteshvara above his head, above the head of this monk, and then light flowing, purifying him, healing his sickness, and so on. So that's a very nice practice to do. So it's good to visualize something together with mantras, but even if you don't, I think it's still nice just to recite the mantras. Yeah, it's a good thing to do. Okay, next question is, what is better for the spiritual path? Consciously suppress desire or realize the desire consciously? Well, I don't know what you mean by suppress. My understanding of that word, suppress, the way I think of it is not a positive thing, but it's like you're kind of pushing down the desire, uh, just keeping it under control, uh, and maybe even denying it. That's possible. That the desire is there in the mind, but you're denying it, pretending it's not there. So if that's my understanding of the meaning of suppression, and that is not helpful at all. Because the desire doesn't go away, it's still there in your mind, and it could even create other kinds of problems, like when we suppress emotions, they can come out in other ways, like tension, physical tension, or sickness, or even other kinds of mental problems. Maybe it comes out in your dream. You have a really out of control dream. So it's not a solution to suppress desire or anger or any disturbing emotion. Isn't a real solution, isn't a real remedy. It doesn't go away. It's still there in the mind, and it can create problems for us and possibly for other people. For like anger, for example, sometimes somebody may suppress their anger for a long time. Maybe they're angry at their husband or they're angry at their wife, and they just try to keep it under control for a while. But then at some point, it's like the dam bursts and then kind of comes out all over the place. So I'm sure you've all had some experiences like that. And so suppression is not a helpful way of dealing with any disturbing emotion. So instead, what's helpful is to acknowledge that emotion, acknowledge that it's there in your mind, and then find solutions. There are remedies that we can use to deal with. Here it's talking about desire. So there's meditations that you can use, methods you can use in meditation to. And the ideal thing is to transform your mind so that instead of having desire, you have another state of mind. Like there's a mental factor, a virtuous mental factor that's called non-attachment. And it's the absence of attachment. So instead of seeing that object as being so wonderful and so fantastic and exaggerating its attractiveness and then wanting to possess it and thinking it's the source of happiness and so on. So that's what attachment or desire is all about. So non-attachment, the opposite of that state of mind, is being able to look at that object and not have all those kind of thoughts and feelings. You don't want to go to the opposite state of mind of anger or aversion. We have to be careful about that. It's not we're trying to develop aversion for the object, but just a neutral state of mind where we just see it and are not attached to it, don't have desire. Now, this is very difficult to do. And in fact, to be completely free of desire and attachment, it's necessary to realize emptiness. So it's the wisdom of emptiness that is the actual antidote that eliminates desire and all the other afflictive emotions. But in the meantime, until we've gained that realization, then we use these other methods, these other tools. And what I find helpful in working with desire is thinking about impermanence, how everything is subject to change, and it is changing. And so if you can imagine or kind of visualize this object of desire that you have, and then imagine how it's going to look in the future, after 1 year, after 2 years, after 5 years, 10 years, 50 years, 100 years. Right now, maybe it looks very wonderful, really beautiful, really fantastic. But if you imagine how it's going to look later on in the future, it's definitely not going to look as wonderful as it does now. So that can help to kind of pull the rug out from under your desire, your attachment. And another thing that can help is to contemplate how other people see that object. I mentioned this yesterday. Different people have different ways of seeing and different feelings about the same object. So an object that you find really wonderful and attractive and fantastic, think about how other people see it. And sometimes you just hear people make comments like this, maybe there's a person that you find really attractive and you hear somebody say, oh, that person, they drive me crazy, or they're really unattractive, or they're really ugly. You might hear somebody else make a comment about that same person or that same object that shows that they don't find it attractive. They don't see the object in the same way you do. And that's always the case. It's always the case that different people have different perceptions and different likes and dislikes. And so that brings you back to yourself, to your own mind, and how it's your mind that's seeing this object in a certain way. And the object doesn't exist that way from its own side, but your mind is probably projecting and exaggerating, making up stories, and so on and so forth. So contemplating that and recognizing the role that your mind plays in seeing that object as attractive and desirable. But the object from its own side probably isn't as attractive as you make it out to be. And we can also see how our own mind changes over time. I mentioned that woman who, thought her husband was like a Greek god and he was just so wonderful, so fantastic. And she was just really, really full of desire and attachment for him. But then at some point that changed. And, she she stopped seeing him in that exaggerated way and then saw him in just the way he was. So we've probably all had experiences like that, where at one point in time, towards a certain person or towards a certain object, we were just so, wow, it's so wonderful, so fantastic. But then later, after some time, maybe we just felt neutral, blah, maybe even felt aversion. So to look at our mind, to look at the role our mind plays in the way we perceive objects can help. So I think that was the last question. So yeah, don't suppress the desire, accept it, acknowledge it, be honest about it. And then don't follow it. Don't let your mind get carried away on the tsunami wave of desire. And instead, use wisdom. Use your wisdom, your intelligence to investigate and analyze and find a remedy for the desire. Okay, so the next part of the outline is about initiations. So in order to practice Tantra fully, and by that I mean you're able to visualize yourself in the form of the deity, the tantric deity, and do all the other visualizations as well. So to do that, you need to first receive an initiation. Initiation is said to be like the entrance to Tantra. But even if you haven't had an initiation, some practices that are included in Tantra can still be done as long as you don't visualize yourself as the deity. So, for example, Nyungne, the practice of Nyungne, it's a retreat related to Avalokiteshvara, and it's usually conducted over 2 days. And there's a number of sessions that you do, and you spend part of that time fasting, not eating, not drinking, not speaking. So people are allowed to attend a Nyungne and do a Nyungne, even if they haven't received the initiation of Chenrezig, but they just can't visualize themselves as Chenrezig. Instead, you visualize Chenrezig in front of you or at your heart, but you don't generate yourself in the form of Chenrezig. So that's actually quite nice to do, just to be able to get some taste of visualizing these deities, because they are manifestations of enlightened mind. It's like enlightened mind speaking to us and taking that form in order to communicate to us the kind of qualities of enlightenment, like compassion and love and so forth. So it's a beautiful, inspiring practice to do, even if you haven't had an initiation. So anyway, initiation is a ceremony, and it's conducted by a master. And the master who gives the initiations needs to have certain qualifications, such as they themselves must have received the initiation before, and they must have done a retreat of the deity. That's actually a later topic we'll get to, of the qualities of a master, a Vajrayana master. But anyway, it can't be just anybody. Not just anybody can give initiations. The person needs to have the right qualities. But then the person receiving the initiation, the disciple, also needs to have certain qualities or prerequisites. You need to have taken refuge. So that's usually the first step people take when they wish to become a Buddhist, after studying Buddhism for a while and really getting to the point where they feel, I want to be a Buddhist. So then they go through a ceremony of taking refuge. And they also need to have a good understanding of the 3 principal aspects of the path. So if you've received teachings on those and meditated on those, and you have some taste, some experience of those 3, renunciation, bodhicitta, and the wisdom of emptiness. And your motivation for taking the initiation and doing tantric practice is altruism, bodhicitta. So you really want to help sentient beings. You really want to reach enlightenment to help all sentient beings. That's your reason. You shouldn't have ulterior motivations, wanting to achieve something just for yourself. So you really should have unselfish dedication to helping all sentient beings. And it's also said it's important to have faith in Tantra, that you feel Tantra is genuine, it's valid, it's a good practice. It was taught by the Buddha, and following it, practicing it is going to be a cause for your enlightenment. It's really going to enable you to reach enlightenment. So there needs to be faith, and also faith in the teacher, the master, because when you take an initiation from a master, a lama, then you're making a relationship. You're entering into a teacher-disciple relationship with that teacher. So you have to, I'll talk more about that later, but you have certain responsibilities in the way that you view that teacher and the way you behave with regard to that teacher. So you need to have enough faith to be able to do that. And then also you need to have a willingness to keep whatever commitments there are. Sometimes when an initiation is given, the Lama will give a commitment, which could be recitation of a certain number of mantras, but it's also sometimes more than just reciting mantras. Sometimes you're asked to do a sadhana, a practice every day for the rest of your life. So you're making a commitment. And sometimes it's quite a big commitment. So you really have to think carefully. Am I willing to do that? Am I able to do that? Do I have the ability to do that? Because it's said to be quite negative if we take commitments, make commitments, and then don't keep them. Like breaking a promise to the Buddha, breaking a promise to the Tantric master. And with some initiations, there's also vows. This is mainly in highest yoga tantra. There's tantric vows. There's a whole set of tantric vows that you take on, and you have to keep those the rest of your life. And also with all tantric initiations, there's the taking of bodhisattva vows. There's a whole set of bodhisattva vows, and so it's important to learn about those beforehand, before taking an initiation, and check to see if you really are willing to keep those and able to keep those. So taking an initiation usually involves commitments that you make for the rest of your life, and you have to be willing to keep those to the best of your ability. And then finally, when you attend an initiation, it's not enough just to sit there and that's all you have to do to get the initiation. You have to participate. You have to keep your mind focused and concentrated to the best of your ability, not fall asleep, and not let your mind wander all over the place. You have to be very alert, very attentive, pay attention to what the Lama is saying, and the Lama will ask you to do certain visualizations and think certain thoughts. So you have to participate to the best of your ability. You have to at least try to do those visualizations and have those thoughts in order to actually receive the initiation. Okay. So those are the things you have to do from your side in order to receive an initiation. And like I say, it's not enough just to sit there, just to be there in the room. One time I was at a Dharma center, and this High Lama came and gave an initiation. I think it was the highest yoga tantra initiation. And afterwards, there was one woman who, this was her very first experience in a Tibetan Buddhist center. I don't know how she ended up there. Maybe, a friend said, "Oh, there's this Lama coming. You should come. You should come." And so she came and she was there in the room, but she really didn't understand anything that was going on. She had no idea what Tibetan Buddhism was all about, what Tantra was all about, and initiations and so on. She just came there to see this Lama. And so then when it was all over, uh, someone told her, "Well, now you have these commitments. You have tantric vows, and you have these commitments that you have to do every day." And she just completely freaked out. Um, she didn't know what she was getting herself in for, and didn't understand any of it. So she kind of got very upset. And someone brought her to see the Lama. He was back in his room, and and he was told what had happened, and he said, "Don't worry, you didn't receive the initiation." So that was a confirmation of what I'm saying, that it's not enough just to be in the room when an initiation is happening. You have to be qualified to receive the initiation. You have to understand what's going on. You have to participate in what's going on. And you have to have the actual intention to take this initiation and to take the vows and commitments. So in the case of that woman, she didn't have any of those things, so she didn't actually receive it. I'm sure she was very relieved when she was told, "Don't worry, you haven't received it. You don't have those commitments." And also in India and Nepal, or yeah, sometimes like the Dalai Lama or another High Lama is giving an initiation, and thousands of people come. Tibetan people, they love initiations, and they bring their kids and their grandparents, and and the kids, the little kids, they're sitting there and they're playing. They're playing with each other, playing with toys during the initiation. So they're not receiving the initiation just because they're sitting there physically present. They're not receiving it because they don't understand what's going on. They're just going there because it's like a family picnic. It's like a party, chance to be with their family. So, yeah, so to actually receive an initiation, we need to have those qualifications and know what we're doing, know what we're receiving, and have the intention to take it and do our best to follow it. And so during the initiation, in a very general way, um, it's an opportunity to have our Buddha nature awakened because of the Lama, the visualizations that the Lama is doing, and the recitations that they are reciting, and so on and so forth. So it's a way of kind of awakening our Buddha nature, our Buddha potential, and our body, speech, and mind are purified. Not totally, of course, but to a certain extent, there's some purification that takes place. And we receive the permission to do the practice related to that deity. So if it's Avalokitesh, for example, then after an initiation, then you're allowed to fully practice this deity and even visualize yourself as the deity. So all of these factors are like nourishment to our Buddha nature. Our Buddha nature is a bit like a seed inside of us. And with an ordinary seed, like flower seed or vegetable seed, it has the potential to grow into a plant and make a beautiful flower or make beautiful vegetables. But it needs the right conditions. It needs water, it needs soil, fertilizer, heat. So if those conditions come together, the seed is able to open up, transform, turn into a plant, and then have these beautiful flowers and so on. So our Buddha nature is similar to that. It's like a seed inside of our mind. It has the potential to transform and bring about enlightenment, the state of enlightenment, our mind transforming into enlightened mind. So the initiation is like providing conditions, at least some conditions, some of the causes and conditions for our Buddha nature, our Buddha potential to start to grow and transform. But of course, we need more than just attending an initiation. We also need to practice. So after receiving an initiation, then we need to engage in practice to further nourish our Buddha nature, our Buddha potential. So there's 3 kinds of initiation, and I received this explanation from one Lama named Dakpo Rinpoche, who lives in France. He's been living in France for many years. He's about the same age as His Holiness, so he's in his 80s. Very wonderful, very knowledgeable Lama. So I was quite happy to receive this explanation because it's unusual. Normally, people just talk about initiations, and it's not always easy to learn about different kinds of initiations. But there are different kinds of initiations; they're not all the same. So one kind of initiation is called a great initiation. In Tibetan, it's Wang Chen. And a great initiation is the actual door or entrance to Tantra. If you want to practice Tantra, it's necessary to first receive a great initiation. So not all initiations are this kind of great initiation. And as far as I know, there's only certain deities, certain Buddha figures for which there is a great initiation. And this would also depend on the class of Tantra. And so for Kriya Tantra, that's Action Tantra, that's the first class of Tantra. There's a great initiation of Avalokiteshvara, Chenrezig. And I also know that Medicine Buddha, there's a great initiation for Medicine Buddha. And Mikyoba, what's it called? Mitupa, another deity, not very well known, Mitupa. I believe there's also a great initiation associated with that deity. And a great initiation usually extends over 2 days. It's in 2 parts. And on the first day, there's sort of preliminary aspects and so there's vows are taken, like the Bodhisattva vows are taken, and certain teachings are given, certain visualizations are done, and usually at the end of the first part of the initiation, you're given a piece of kusha grass, 2 pieces of kusha grass. And you're asked to take these home and put them under your mattress. You put the longer one under your mattress and the shorter one under your pillow. And then you're asked to watch your dreams that night. And there's also a piece of red string that is tied around your arm. It's kind of protection. So some of you may have attended an initiation. This may sound familiar. You've had that kind of experience. And then you come back the second day, and that's the main part of the initiation, which is usually rather long. So if you've been to an initiation like that that's lasted for 2 days, then that was probably a great initiation. Although I've also attended initiations where they did everything in 1 day because of shortage of time. The Lama didn't have the time to do it over 2 days, so he did everything in 1 day. But he still passed out the kusha grass. So anyway, a great initiation is the main kind of initiation you need to attend in order to enter Tantra and be fully qualified to practice Tantra. And the second kind of initiation is in Tibetan, it's Jenam, which means subsequent permission. So this means that after you have already received a great initiation and have entered Tantra, then you can attend a subsequent initiation, which is usually much shorter in time. It doesn't take as long. And then you have the permission to do the practice of that deity. So most of the initiations that are given, as far as I know, like in Dharma centers and so on, they're this second kind. So, for example, Tara, Vajrasattva, Manjushri, and even some initiations of Chenrezig or Avalokiteshvara are usually this second type of initiation. And strictly speaking, if you haven't already attended a great initiation and you only attend the second one, subsequent permission or Jainam, you're not really qualified to do tantric practice in the full way, visualizing yourself as a deity. So the lamas don't always explain this, but anyway, that's what I've learned from Dr. Rinpoche. But yeah, so there also may be different opinions about that. But anyway, it is good to check before attending an initiation what kind of an initiation it is, whether it's the great one or if it's the subsequent permission, the Jainam. It's a little bit complicated, I have to say. It's not so straightforward. And then the third kind of initiation is called a long life initiation. This isn't maybe very common, but it sometimes happens for example, when the Dalai Lama is teaching, he's giving teachings in India. And at the end of his teachings, on the final day of his teachings, because of having somebody requesting it, he may sometimes give a long life initiation. But it can also happen sometimes in other situations as well. And there's only certain deities that I know of that have a long life initiation. White Tara, the white Tara is practiced for long life. It said that if you do the practice of white Tara, you can clear away obstacles to your life and extend your lifespan so that you can live longer. So there's a long life initiation for white Tara. Another long life deity is Amitayus. Amitayus, the deity of long life. And another one is called Ushnisha Vijaya, or Namgyalma in Tibetan. It's a female deity. She's also white in color, and she has multiple arms. I think 8 arms. Not very common, but she's also a long life deity. So that's another kind of initiation. And in some cases, I think a long life initiation can be given, and you don't have to take the bodhisattva vows or any commitments. It's more like a blessing. It's given as a blessing to help you have a longer life. So that's just a little bit about initiations. I can see there's another question in the chat box, kind of related to this. After years dedicated to studying and reading about Buddhism, how can you take refuge or initiation when you do not have the possibility of attending a temple? Well, nowadays I've heard, and yeah, I've heard that there are cases of uh, people taking refuge without being physically present in a temple. Um, so, uh, for example, there's people in prison, inmates in prison who wish to be Buddhists and wish to take refuge. And sometimes the teacher will give them over the telephone, by telephone. If they can't visit, if the teacher can't physically visit the prisoner and be in the prison, they'll sometimes talk on the telephone and give them refuge over the phone. So if that can be done with prisoners, I think it could be done with anybody. So if someone is unable to go to a Buddhist temple or Buddhist center and be physically present with a teacher, then they could ask for that. They could request, and now we can also do it on Zoom. So Skype or Zoom, one of these media where you can actually see the other person. And so that's an option that you could try if you wish to take refuge with a certain teacher. You could request that they give you refuge by Zoom or Skype. And then with regard to initiations, in recent years, the Dalai Lama has given permission for people to receive initiations from him by I don't know what they use, Zoom or live stream. Yeah. So I don't know if this has happened this year, but I think last year and the year before, he was giving some initiations in India, and they were being broadcast over live stream, I think, this media. And he said that, if you wish to take this initiation, then you can do so in your own home, but you have to do it live. You can't watch later, like on YouTube, and receive it. So if you're there at the same time that the Dalai Lama is giving the initiation and you're sitting in your home watching on live stream, and you really think, I am taking this initiation, I'm doing all the visualizations along with the Dalai Lama, then you can receive the initiation. So actually, I did this. I was in Israel at the time and wanted to attend this initiation. So I was sitting there in Israel. Dalai Lama was in India, and I was, following it on YouTube, not YouTube, but live stream. So, but I heard there was some controversy about this. When some other lamas heard about this, they were not very comfortable about it, and saying this isn't really proper. You're supposed to be physically present with the lama during an initiation. But I figure the Dalai Lama, he knows what he's doing. So if he said it's okay to do this, then I don't know. Has Lama Zopa Rinpoche done that? Has anyone heard of Lama Zopa Rinpoche giving initiations in that way? And no, yeah. So, to me, it's an act of kindness and compassion, because, not everyone is able to be physically present when a lama is giving an initiation or giving refuge. But this is making it possible for such people to do those, to attend those ceremonies if they really, really wish to. Okay, so then another question: a great initiation and empowerment, is it the same? Yeah, so empowerment is another English word that's used And that's actually quite close to the Tibetan. The Tibetan term is Wang, and Wang means power. uh, so yeah, so empowerment is another way that people translate Wang, and so that's why I think it is helpful to know the Tibetan term. So if there's an initiation being given, and maybe they're just saying initiation or they're just saying empowerment, then it's good to ask, well, what kind of initiation is it? And if you know the Tibetan term, Wang Chen is the great initiation, or Jainong is subsequent permission. So it may actually be a Jainong, but they're still calling it an empowerment or an initiation. So if you know the Tibetan terms, then you can, be more clear about which type it is. Tantra is very complicated. Many details and also many deities. There's just so many different deities, and the deities are practiced for different purposes in some cases. I don't know how it came to be this way. How there came. Well, I mean, they do say that, yeah, all the deities are different manifestations of the Buddha. And because the Buddha wants to help all sentient beings, and sentient beings are different. They have different personalities, different inclinations, different levels of intelligence, and so on. So, because sentient beings are different, the Buddhas will appear or manifest in different forms that are suitable and able to help different sentient beings according to their level. So that's what I find helpful, is just to think that all the different deities are just different appearances of the Buddha's mind, different manifestations of enlightened mind to help different kinds of people. And so some of them I may feel, well, that one doesn't seem to suit me. I don't feel so attracted to do that particular practice. But I find other deities, other practices that I do feel very attracted to, very comfortable with, very like, yeah, this is something that I need, this is something I want to do. So that's fine. You don't have to take initiations into all the different deities and do all the different practices. You can just take one or two and focus on those. So how about if we take a break at this point? 5-minute break. Oh, I see there's one more question here. Lung. What does the lung refer to? Well, that word can have different meanings. I assume the meaning here is because lung, the word lung, is the word for energy or wind or air. It's the same like when we say the wind is blowing. It's lung. I call it lung. But that word is also used when a lama is giving a transmission of a text. For example, the Heart Sutra or a mantra, Om Mani Padme Hum. If they say that if you want to recite a mantra, it's best if you do so after receiving either an initiation or a lung. And a lung means the Lama is just reciting the mantra and you repeat it after them. Usually they do that 3 times. So, for example, Lama Zopa Rinpoche might say, I'm going to give you the lung of Om Mani Padme Hum, the mantra Om Mani Padme Hum. So then they'll recite it. And I think usually you are asked to repeat it after the Lama. So then there's some more power to your practice after receiving the lung of the mantra. Then when you recite it on your own, it's going to be more effective, more powerful. So that's the lung of a mantra, but they also give lungs of texts, like I said, the Heart Sutra or the Lamrim Chenmo, or one of the sutras, the Buddha sutras. So there the Lama is just reading it in Tibetan, usually, which means you probably won't understand what they're saying, but it's still said to be very good to be present when this is happening and, hear the sound of the words of the text. And then afterwards, if you study the text or later you may teach the text yourself, it's going to be more effective. So that's the meaning of lung. Sometimes it's translated as transmission, and it's done for texts as well as for mantras. So the next point is about Vajrayana masters and disciples. So in Vajrayana, the relationship between you and your master or lama, the one who gives the initiation, is very important. And yeah, in general, in Tibetan Buddhism, this whole topic of gurus, sometimes called guru devotion, or reliance on a spiritual teacher, there's a lot of emphasis on this, a lot of importance given to this. And this is sometimes difficult for us in the West because we don't really have this tradition in our societies of having a guru, having a spiritual teacher, and relating to a spiritual teacher. So one thing I'd like to say at the beginning here is just like in general, how do you establish a relationship with a teacher? How is it that a teacher will become a guru? Not just in terms of Vajrayana, but in terms of Buddhism in general. So it doesn't happen just by you attending a teaching and listening to a teaching given by a teacher. But it mainly depends on your attitude, your decision. So if you hear about a teacher giving a teaching and you're interested in that teaching, you want to go and listen, it's fine to just go and listen, like attending a lecture in university or attending a lecture in a town hall or something like that. And just by you attending that talk doesn't mean that person is now your guru. You have this guru-disciple relationship with them. So it doesn't happen just like that. It mainly depends on you making a decision that you want to take a person as your teacher, as your guru. And ideally, we are advised to take time and really get to know a teacher, observe them, and look for qualities. There's certain qualities that we need to look for in a spiritual teacher. And this is explained in the Lamrim. So probably many of you have heard that already. There's a list of 10 qualities that we should look for in a spiritual teacher. And they include things like ethical behavior. They live ethically and they have a lot of knowledge. They've done a lot of study. They have wisdom. They have compassion and love. That's their motivation for teaching. They really care about sentient beings and want to help them, and they're not looking out for their own gain and fame and that kind of thing. So they need to have the right motivation, altruistic motivation for teaching. So we're told we shouldn't rush into making a teacher-disciple relationship with a teacher. That's very risky because unfortunately there are teachers who don't have the right qualities and might even be motivated for to teach for the wrong reason. And so, yeah, even if a teacher is famous and they're charismatic and we're really impressed, wow, this person is so wonderful and they speak really well and they seem to know so much, that's not enough to take someone as a teacher. So we should really look for these qualities. There's 10 of these qualities of a Mahayana teacher, and take your time. They said, for example, Lama Atisha, great Indian master, very important in that development of Buddhism in Tibet. He actually had many teachers, but the teacher he had the greatest respect for was Lama. Sometimes he's called Lama Serlingpa. Lived in Indonesia. And that's the teacher from whom Atisha learned bodhicitta and developed bodhicitta. So he had great respect for that teacher. But he spent 12 years getting to know that teacher, being around him, observing him, just getting a feel for what kind of person he was before making the decision to take him as a teacher. 12 years. So that meant he was really careful. He was being really, really, really careful before making a commitment. And nowadays, some people, as soon as they meet a teacher, they feel, he's my teacher. I'm going to take him as my teacher. So we're advised not to do that. We're advised at least a couple of years. It doesn't have to be 12 years, but at least 2 or 3 years getting to know a teacher, observing them in different situations. And that is difficult nowadays because we don't usually have the chance to be around a teacher that much. Teachers themselves are traveling a lot. Sometimes they may come for a few days or a week in the place where you are. And you don't really have the chance to get close to them and see what kind of person they are. And also now with video online, Zoom and so on, there's a lot of teachings available online where you can learn from the teacher without ever even meeting them. So it's a bit tricky nowadays to get to know a teacher. But nevertheless, it's still wise to be cautious, to take time, get to know the teacher before making a commitment. And so then it's mainly up to you to decide if you want to take someone as a teacher. And you don't have to communicate that with them. You don't have to say to them, please, can I be your disciple? Please, will you be my teacher? It's okay to do that if that's possible, but it's not always possible. For example, the Dalai Lama, he's so popular. He's, thousands of people see him as their teacher, but it's not possible for every single person to communicate to him and say, please, will you be my teacher? I want to be your disciple. It's not possible. So we can just make the decision on our own after checking and deciding, yes, this is a good teacher. I want to take him as a teacher. And then make that decision on our own, even if we don't communicate it verbally or by letter with the teacher. Now that's in general. However, there are exceptions to that. There are certain cases where a teacher will automatically become our guru. We have this guru-disciple connection with them, even if we don't make that decision. I'm going to take this person as a teacher. So those cases are when we receive an initiation. So if you go to an initiation and you're there because you want to take the initiation, it's not an accident. And so if you receive an initiation from a teacher, then that person becomes one of your teachers. No choice. Other cases would be lung. When you attend a lung, oral transmission of a text or a mantra. So if you attend that and receive a lung from a teacher, then that person becomes a teacher. Also, if you take vows, for example, refuge, when we take refuge, or precepts, like there's different levels of pratimoksha, or individual liberation precepts. Monks and nuns take precepts, and lay people take precepts. So anyone with whom you take precepts, vows, that person also becomes your teacher. And bodhisattva vows as well. So if you attend any of those situations, initiation, vows, long, then that person who's giving that becomes one of your teachers, and you need to practice seeing that person as a teacher. Now, I want to share with you something that the Dalai Lama explains, because some texts and some teachers will say that anyone who is one of your teachers, any Lama who's one of your teachers, you must see them as a Buddha. However, the Dalai Lama says no, that is not the case, because there are different levels of teachings and practices, and there are different ways of seeing a teacher depending on these different levels. So he talks about 3 different levels of teachings and practices. The first one is related more to the Hinayana, or fundamental vehicle level of practice. And so that would include, for example, if the teacher is explaining the Four Noble Truths, that's a topic that's common to all Buddhist traditions, the Four Noble Truths. That's the very first thing the Buddha taught. Also included in that level is taking refuge in the 3 jewels, and taking precepts like lay vows, 5 precepts, or monastic precepts. So any teacher from whom you're receiving that kind of teaching, or vows, refuge and vows and so forth, that's on this level, the fundamental vehicle. And the Dalai Lama says the way that you need to view those teachers is as a representative of the Buddha, someone representing the Buddha. So he says, we see our teacher as a teacher and relate to him or her on a human level. We regard him or her as a wise elder, a sincere practitioner from whom we can learn. So we don't have to see that person as a Buddha, but more like someone who represents the Buddha. The second level of teaching and practice is related to the perfection vehicle, Mahayana. So here we're talking about Mahayana, but not yet Vajrayana. So these will be teachers from whom we learn about bodhicitta, how to develop bodhicitta, and practice the 6 perfections, and teachers from whom we receive the bodhisattva vows. So that's general Mahayana, Paramitayana. So any teacher like that, we should view them as an emanation of the Buddha, or a high bodhisattva. And so he says here the teacher is seen as equal to or like a Buddha, in the sense that the karma accumulated in relation to our teacher is similar to the karma we accumulate in relation to the Buddha. So they're equal to the Buddha, but we're not yet seeing them as the Buddha. And then the third level of teaching and practice is the Vajrayana, Tantra. So the teachers from whom we receive initiations, receive initiations and tantric vows, tantric commitments. So with regard to those teachers, we should see them as Buddha. And that makes complete sense, because both during the time of initiation as well as when we're practicing Vajrayana, we see everybody as a Buddha. We see ourselves as a Buddha. And we see all sentient beings as Buddhas. And we see everywhere as a pure land, a celestial mansion or mandala. So, of course, we also see our teacher as a Buddha. It would be strange not to do that. So the Dalai Lama says, only in tantric practice is it essential to regard the tantric master as a Buddha. And he also says this view of seeing the teacher as a Buddha should not be taught to beginners who are not mature in the Dharma, because it is open to misinterpretation and confusion. And he also says that he recommends students, especially us Westerners, we're not born into Buddhist families and in a Buddhist society. We come to Buddhism when we're already adults, most of us. And so we have to learn Buddhism from the ground up, from the basics up. And so he says it's best to do this in a gradual way. He said, first form a relationship with a fundamental vehicle teacher, Hinayana teacher. Learn the Four Truths. Take refuge when you're ready to do that. And take some precepts, like lay precepts. Do that in the beginning. Later, as your practice progresses, you can seek a teacher who can teach you the Bodhisattva path, practice the 6 perfections, and take the Bodhisattva vows. And then later still, when you're properly prepared and you want to enter Tantra, then you can seek a qualified Tantric master and take initiation and then do deity yoga. So I think that's very wise to go about it in a gradual way, not jump into Tantra right from the beginning before we really understand what we're doing and are able to practice it properly. And then there are some qualities that we need to look for in a teacher, both in the Mahayana tradition, but also in a Vajrayana master. There's also a good text if you are interested in learning more and practicing more about Vajrayana, a text called the 50 Verses of Guru Devotion. Is that in Spanish? In Spanish? Probably a Spanish translation of that. Teresa says yes. Okay. Yeah. So it's actually a very ancient text. I forget who the author is, but it was written a long time ago, and it gives advice on how to relate to a spiritual teacher, in particular in the context of Vajrayana. So if you are serious about doing that kind of practice, you should look for that text and study it and try to practice. So I can see that there are some more questions. Maybe I'll take care of those. Okay, one says there are practices that are not deities, such as, for example, Chu or the preliminaries. Do they have a specific name? So Chu, as far as I know, there are initiations given to qualify someone to practice Chu. That's in our tradition, in the Gelugpa tradition. I can't say about other traditions whether it's required that you first receive an initiation in order to do the Chu practice, but my understanding it is, because when you're doing that practice, at least the way I've learned it, you're visualizing yourself as a deity. So to me, it seems you must have an initiation first. Yeah, I don't know that much about Chu. I haven't. It's not a practice that I've done much of. And you're also visualizing deities outside of yourself. Preliminary practices. So those are practices that you do. They're meant as practices to purify your karma and your afflictions and accumulate merit as preparation for more advanced practices. So every tradition, like in Tibetan Buddhism, there's 4 main traditions: Gelug or Nyingma, Kagyu, and Sakya. So I, mainly stayed with the Gelug tradition. So each of those 4 traditions has their own way of doing preliminary practices, and they might involve different deities, and maybe not always deities. So, for example, prostrations. Doing prostrations in our tradition, in the Gelug tradition, the preliminary practice of prostrations, it's recommended that we do those to the 35 Buddhas. Some of you may have learned that practice. It's very beautiful. So you visualize 35 Buddhas in front of you, prostrate to them while reciting their names, and then confess. There's a text that you confess negative actions that you've done. So that's how one does we're supposed to do 100,000 prostrations at least. The more the better, but the minimum is 100,000 prostrations with the 35 Buddhas. So that's not really tantric. Those 35 Buddhas are all in sutra aspect, like Shakyamuni Buddha. Vajrasattva. So yeah, one of the preliminary practices is Vajrasattva. So Vajrasattva is a tantric deity, but I don't know if it's required to take an initiation. I don't think it is. Some lamas may say yes, but I think in the FPMT it said you don't have to receive the initiation of Vajrasattva, but then you're not visualizing yourself as Vajrasattva. Anyway, you're visualizing Vajrasattva above your head. And then reciting the mantra, and light is streaming through and purifying you and so on. So that does involve a deity, Vajrasattva deity. Mandala offerings, no. Although we should visualize the refuge objects or the merit field in front of us, and that's the objects to whom we're offering the mandala. But yeah, no need to have an initiation to do that. Yeah, so I think many of the preliminary practices don't really involve a deity and an initiation. But I don't know what the meaning is. Do they have a specific name? Preliminary practices. Ngundro in Tibetan. The next question doesn't seem to be a question, but more comment. You can talk about the lung in relation to the condition when practicing, similar to anxiety. Yeah, so that's another meaning of the word lung. Well, because again, lung is the word for wind or energy or air. And it's said, this is in Vajrayana, that we have within our body, like subtle body, we have these different energy winds. And these can sometimes get out of balance. And this happens a lot to Western people, especially when we try to meditate, we try to do retreat. then our winds can get out of balance. So in Tibetan medicine, they have a word for this. They call it lung, and it's like a disease or like a condition, an unhealthy condition, and they have medicine for it. So if you go and see a Tibetan doctor and they feel your pulse, they might say, "Oh yes, you have lung disease," and they'll give you medicine for it. It does help. Yeah, so that's another meaning of lung. It's this condition that I think it's similar to stress or anxiety. Yeah, you push it because we tend to push ourselves really hard. I don't know about Spanish people, but American people especially. We start doing meditation, we start doing, Buddhist practice. Sometimes we really want to go fast and reach enlightenment as quickly as possible. So we tend to push ourselves more than is good for us. And that's when we can get this condition of lung. And it's really bad. It can be really, really bad. Such that yeah. There's different ways it manifests. In my case, I usually feel this tightness in my chest, really hard, solid, tight feeling. Other people may feel it in their head. Um, I don't know, different ways that people experience it. But yeah, what you need to do if you start having that is take it easy. Don't keep pushing yourself. You need to take it easy, relax, go for walks. And if you can, yeah, get some Tibetan medicine. I think nowadays you can even get Tibetan medicine online. I guess you have to know what you need. If you already know the medicine you need, you can order it online. Yeah, so be careful about womb. Why are some tantric deities represented with consort and union? What role does the consort have? So that's a good question. Those deities are only found in highest Yoga Tantra, as far as I know. They're not in Kriya or Charya, and I don't think Yoga either. I think it's only highest Yoga Tantra that depicts deities in union. And it's kind of complicated to understand the role of a consort because you have to have an understanding of what highest Yoga Tantra involves. And that to do that, you really need to take time and study it. But I mentioned a little bit before that in highest Yoga Tantra, their practice is to work with the energy channels in the body. So we have these psychic channels running all through our body. And then there's also these energy winds. There's 10 different energy winds also running through our body. And there's also chakras, like the main one is the heart. There's also throat, crown, navel, lower chakra. And there's also something called drops, which I don't fully understand what a drop is. But anyway, those are also in there. And the idea in highest Yoga Tantra is that inside of our heart chakra, right in the middle of our heart chakra, and the heart chakra isn't the physical heart, but it's more here in the center of the chest. So deep inside the heart chakra is this little drop. I think it's a non-physical thing. And inside this little drop is the very subtle mind of clear light. And it sort of abides there right from the beginning of our life, from the moment of our conception until the moment we die, and then it leaves the body. So the idea in highest Yoga Tantra, as I mentioned before, is to make that very subtle mind, the clear light mind, to make it manifest, to gain control over it and make it manifest, and then use that mind to meditate on emptiness, to realize emptiness. And if you're able to do that, it's very, very difficult to do, of course, but if you're able to do that, then quickly you are able to clear your mind of the obscurations that prevent enlightenment and reach enlightenment in a relatively short time. And the way to make this very subtle mind of clear light manifest is to gain control over all the energy winds, all the looms in the body, and be able to bring them all into the central channel. Now they're kind of running all over the body. And so a yogi, a tantric yogi, will do various practices to bring these energy winds into the central channel, bring them right to the heart chakra, where the very subtle mind is. And if you're able to do that, bring all those winds in and dissolve them into the heart chakra, that will enable one to make this clear light mind manifest. This is extremely difficult to do. You have to be a highly accomplished yogi. But they do say that, I said there's 10 winds, but there's 5 main ones, 5 main winds. And 4 of those winds, a yogi, a meditator, will be able to bring into the central channel and dissolve in the central channel just through the power of meditation. Through doing tantric practices, they can do that. But there's one wind, the 5th wind, that is very difficult to bring it into the central channel and dissolve it there. And it said that to be able to do that, you need to engage in consort practice. It's by using a consort that you will be able to gain control over that wind, bring it into the central channel, dissolve it there, and then awaken the clear light mind. So someone who's at that point, having spent a lot of time, a lot of energy doing, there's different stages you go through. There's the development stage, and then there's the completion stage. So this is like a very high level of practice. So someone who's at that level is qualified to use a consort, an actual consort. But most people are not. And some people might think they're at that level and start using consorts, but they're actually not. And I once heard the Dalai Lama say that, how do you know if you're at that level to be able to use a consort? So in the texts, there's different criteria. One criterion is if you have the ability to, let's say there's an apple tree, you can, just with the power of your mind, you can cause an apple to fall down from the tree. And with the power of your mind, you can also cause the apple to go back up and be reattached to the tree. So if you have that ability, then you're qualified to do consort practice. I think there's some other kind of tests as well to see who's ready for that. But yeah, you have to be quite highly developed and highly advanced in your practice to use a consort and use that kind of practice properly. So that's the use of consort practice. But then the visions or the images that show a male and female deity in union, they are said to represent the indivisible union of bliss, of method and wisdom, or bliss and emptiness. So as I mentioned before, those are the 2 main practices one needs to cultivate and develop in Tantra, wisdom realizing emptiness, and method, which in the Paramitayana mainly means bodhicitta, compassion, and so on. But in Vajrayana, it has an additional meaning of bliss, great bliss. But this, to really understand all of that, you need to understand Tantra. But anyway, that's the meaning of the symbolism of the male and female in union. It's a reminder that we need to cultivate those 2 states of mind and unite them simultaneously in one state of mind and practice in that way um, as much as we can. Okay, next question says, is it necessary for a master or guru to have the experience or realization of everything he teaches? Well, that's the ideal. That's the best case scenario. If the teacher actually does have realizations of what they're talking about. Because then, of course, when that teacher is teaching, they're talking from their own firsthand experience. And that makes it easier for the listeners to also have that experience. Like, for example, in the story of the Buddha, the life story of the Buddha, so he meditated and then, became enlightened. And then he started teaching. And it said that sometimes the people listening to his teachings, just hearing one teaching, would gain the realization of emptiness, or would even, become arhats, liberated. I mean, they had to have been, they were people who had already been meditating and their minds were quite highly developed. But to me, it just points that, yeah, being in the presence of the Buddha, actually there, physically present with the Buddha and looking at him and hearing his words. And he knows what he's talking about. It's not just words, but he has the experience behind those words. That must just be so powerful to be able to, get the realization as well. And so, yeah, that's best if the teacher has the actual experience. They know what they're talking about. But it may be difficult to find teachers like that. I mean, definitely His Holiness the Dalai Lama and Lama Zopa Rinpoche, they've got realizations. But, like myself, I'm a teacher. I teach Dharma, but I don't have any realizations. Except that I do feel confident that by practicing the Buddha's teachings, you can bring about a change in your mind. I've seen that in myself. I've become a much nicer person, more kind and more patient. So I'm definitely, convinced about that. So when I talk about that kind of thing, then I think people can be convinced too. Yes, this really does work. So that's the best. But in the Lam Rim, they say, if you can't find a teacher who has all those 10 qualities, and then try to find a teacher who has 3. There's the kind of 3 minimum qualities to look for. So one is that the person has more good qualities than faults. So they might still have some faults, but their good qualities outweigh their faults. And the second quality is they care more about others than themselves. So they might still have some selfishness there, but you can see that they're very altruistic, very caring, very kind towards others, not so selfish. And the third quality is that they are more concerned about future lives than this life. Meaning, they're not so concerned about the 8 worldly dharmas and just being happy and comfortable in this life, but they're really concerned about future lives and trying to get the disciples to be concerned about that as well. So, we don't have to find a teacher who's 100% perfect in every way, but at least someone who has those qualities is good. So there's a question that says, I understand that in your youth, you could read the autobiography of a yogi. Do you know Kriya Yoga? If yes, does it have any parallels with some Tantra teaching? I did read that book, Autobiography of a Yogi. I think I was still a teenager then, so that's a long time ago. And I don't remember much of that book at all, except that it was very inspiring. I felt really inspired to go to India and look for spiritual teachers. but I don't remember any of the details of like Kriya Yoga. So yeah, I think in Hinduism, as far as I know, there is something called Kriya Yoga, but I haven't studied it, and so I don't know how that compares with Kriya Yoga in um, Tibetan Buddhist Vajrayana. Oh yeah, there's just one last point about the disciple, qualities of a disciple. These are, if we want to be a practitioner of Vajrayana, qualities that we need. So there's a quotation here from a text called the Vajra Garland. I'm not sure. I guess that's a tantric text. So it says, faithful and full of respect for the Guru, abiding always in the practice of virtue, with wrong view completely abandoned. Such a one must have received many teachings, free of the faults of killing and harming, with his or her mind intent on liberating beings, always diligent and very pure. These and others are the virtues he or she should have. The best of all is strong faith. Yeah, so it is said that to be successful in tantric practice, it's necessary to have faith in the practice of Vajrayana, and also faith in the teachers. And I think some people find it easy to have faith. I think Spanish people probably have an easier time than Americans and Northern Europeans. We tend to be more skeptical, more questioning, more doubtful, and faith sometimes doesn't come very easily. But I notice when I'm in Italy or in France or in Spain, Latin people, it seems that faith comes more easily. Maybe I'm wrong, but that's just my observation. Tibetans are amazing. They have such faith, incredible faith and devotion. And but again, it shouldn't be blind faith. We should, like the Dalai Lama says, we should investigate, we should check carefully, and be sure about what we are doing before we do it. But then I think the point is, once you have done that investigation and you really do feel, yeah, I think Vajrayana practice is good and I want to do it, then from that point on, if you don't have faith and if your mind has doubt, that can become a hindrance. For example, if you're doing a visualization of a deity and you're thinking, how do I know this deity really exists? How do I know that I have the potential to become Buddha? If those kinds of thoughts come up in your mind, then that can kind of ruin your practice. So you have to be willing to say, yes, the deity does exist. Tara does exist, and I can become Tara. You need to have that kind of confidence and just jump in. I can do this. So I think that's the point. And that's what will bring results. Doing it with that kind of attitude, rather than thinking, is this really good for me, or maybe I'm wasting my time. If you let your mind go in that direction, then very difficult to get the results. Okay, so this has been just a brief introduction to a very complex subject, and I hope that you will have a chance to learn more, study more, practice more. It's a really beautiful tradition, and we're very fortunate that we have the chance to, because they say that not all the Buddhas teach Tantra. There's a saying that in our world, this age, there will be 1,000 Buddhas who come into the world and teach and established the Dharma. But out of those 1,000 Buddhas, only 4 teach Tantra. And so one of those 4 is Shakyamuni Buddha. So we are very fortunate to be in a time when Shakyamuni Buddha came to this world and taught Tantra, Vajrayana. That means we have the chance to learn it. So even if we can't practice it fully, even to just dabble our toes in it, like just get a little bit of taste of Tantra, make some connection with Tantra is good, because then that will enable us to meet the Tantric teachings and Tantric practices again in the future, in future lives, and hopefully continue practicing it to reach enlightenment.